Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
April 4, 2020, the Don't Cry for CEOs edition. First up, from the New York Times, it is now apparent under the Trump administration that if you tell the truth about coronavirus, you'll be fired from the U.S. Navy. The Navy Captain Brett Crozier was removed from his post as the commanding officer of the USS Theodore Roosevelt after he appropriately went through channels to raise an alarm about coronavirus decimating his crew. His commanding officer, or rather the acting Secretary of the Navy, fired him for doing so. So I'm sure my father's rolling over in his grave at the decimation of the U.S. Navy for an officer following a chain of command and reporting up, but that is the reality under the Trump administration. You can't tell the truth or you'll be fired. Next up, on supply chain, a new risk which is coming into play that compliance officers need to be aware of, and that is supply chain financing. The Wall Street Journal calls this the sleeping risk on the books of U.S. businesses that could be awakened by the coronavirus health crisis and pandemic as a sudden cash crunch exposes this hidden type of financing that makes balance sheets look better. The supply chain finance masks the financial stress, and the prime concern is that banks or other lenders may yank financing from struggling companies, cutting off sources of cash. If banks stop these facilities, it's like cutting credit lines. So yet another thing that I think compliance practitioners need to be aware of: are you engaging in supply chain financing, and what will it mean? In a story that only the Wall Street Journal could love, in our lead story, Don't Cry for CEOs is actually the other way around. The Wall Street Journal says you should cry for CEOs because they're having to make very tough decisions about laying off people, and indeed some of the toughest of their careers. And the monies they're making should not be cut because, they're really working hard to lay people off, furlough people, cut their salaries, engage in human capital decimation. So don't cry for CEOs, give them more money, and that's certainly the position of the Wall Street Journal. If you know a CEO, pat him on the back and say, good job for furloughing all those people and not taking a pay cut. It's certainly going to help the U.S. going forward. And then finally, also from the New York Times, is what will be the effect of private equity going forward. Private equity is now lining up for bailout monies, and as they do so, one of the questions will become, will they use this money not to inject capital into the economy, but to buy struggling companies so that they destroy the value of companies by coming in, swooping in, and buying at fire sale prices. This obviously would have a very detrimental effect on the economy, but it would not have a detrimental effect on these private equity firms. So the Trump administration has signaled that it wants to give PE firms bailout money so that they can continue. Given how PE firms have typically acted in the past, it would not be surprising to see them swoop down and start to pick up these companies for literally pennies on the dollar. If they do so, it obviously destroys the value of those companies and destroys the value of any pension or savings around the workers. I'm pleased to announce a new podcast series which will be premiering on the Compliance Podcast Network next week. It is the series, The Compliance Life, where I engage in an extended conversation with chief compliance officers about their road to the CCO chair and what life has been like for them in that seat. It's something that I know you will enjoy, so please check it out. It premieres next week on the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.